Hello, welcome to my channel. I am DJ Ghetto Steve, and this is Deconstructing DJ Ghetto Steve. Today, I want to take a bit of a departure from my series on the different denominations and history of the church. Jesus is My Girlfriend is another channel that I follow, and they actually did a really good video about entering polyamory after having spent years, having spent growing up in the church. So I wanted to kind of piggyback on that and give a little bit of my experience of getting into polyamory after leaving the church. So coming out of a heavily patriarchal culture, I entered into polyamory with a lot of preconceived notions that negatively affected our practice of polyamory in those first few relationships. I told my ex-husband about 2 weeks into us dating that I was bisexual, and while I wanted a long-term relationship with him, I also wanted to explore my bisexuality. I wanted to have relationships with other women. I didn't want it to be just threesomes or something. I wanted to have actual relationships with these other people because I felt like it was entirely possible to love multiple people at the same time. Now, he requested that I not date any other men, that I only have relationships with women. This is what's known as an OPP, a one penis policy. As I understand things now, I would never agree to something like this. But at the time, I thought, well, I have the guy. I'm not interested in any other guys, so I have zero issues with putting this restriction on myself. It's not actually going to impact what I'm trying to do and what I'm trying to explore here. This is actually an example of when people engage in consensual non-monogamy that is not necessarily ethical non-monogamy. Creating a hierarchy between heterosexual relationships and same-sex relationships is incredibly demeaning and dismissive to homosexual relationships. It identifies the homosexual relationships as less threatening to that primary heterosexual relationship. And they are attempting to cover up insecurities with control rather than actually talking through the issues and finding an ethical way forward. They would prefer to just control their partner and tell them what they can and cannot do rather than allowing them autonomy. It inherently sees gay and lesbian and otherwise queer relationships as less serious, less intense, less real. There have been so many times when I have been told that love between same-sex partners is not actually love, it's lust or it's something else. Only a heterosexual relationship can actually experience love. In many cases, this is put forth by the cis straight guy in the relationship, and he isn't concerned with a lesbian stealing his wife because surely she'd never leave him unless it was for another man. A woman couldn't possibly offer what he is able to offer, or something different but equally desirable. It's chock full of homophobia and transphobia. Now, this was stuff I didn't figure out until I had been actively poly for several years, so we all make mistakes in our early 20s. So I was a horrible hinge in my first couple of relationships. A hinge, or a hub, is a person who is dating multiple people that are not also dating each other. So they're the hub at the middle of partner A and partner B. I would have my hubby and a girlfriend, Never had more than 2 partners at a time. But in the early days of dating someone new, I would just get obsessed with this new person and want to spend all my time with them, constantly texting them, and really drop the ball in showing my hubby how he was still special to me and I still valued the connection that I had with him. That was a skill that took some years to cultivate. I had to do a lot of apologizing, being introspective, correcting my behavior, and setting up internal boundaries to help myself retain perspective in those early days of any new relationship. I have come to realize that I am extra susceptible to NRE, which is new relationship energy, because of my history of codependency and neurodivergence. Bipolar, unfortunately, has an obsessive component. It's shared with ADHD, which I am not diagnosed with, but have had multiple therapists tell me I show indications of. So I am more cognizant of my hyperfixations these days versus my earlier 20s. Shocker, older me is wiser. One of the things that I had to change very early on was my adherence to hierarchy. Before concurrently dating multiple people, I thought it was healthy or preferred to have a primary relationship and then secondary relationships. And those secondary relationships are more like fun dalliances or friends with benefits, nothing super serious. They weren't as authentic of a connection with people than your primary relationship. But boy, howdy, that first lesbian relationship was an eye-opener. It was everything I had always wanted my heterosexual relationships to be. It felt like I was Dorothy stepping out of the house into Oz into vibrant technicolor. Spoiler, I came out as a lesbian later in life. The things that made those early years in polyamory work started with the communication that I had with my spouse about feelings, values, and disagreements. We did have some bad fights occasionally, but looking back at them, it's very clear that they were a combination of no healthy emotional regulation tools learned in development and untreated, undiagnosed bipolar episodes. Those episodes absolutely ruined our marriage, despite my best attempts to manage it before I was able to access actual licensed mental health care services. Thank you, Obama, for ensuring coverage of mental health services. We also had an immense value placed on autonomy. We were a team, but we were full individuals. When I married him, I told people that I knew he was the one because he helped me see how complete I was in myself rather than him being my better half. We also greatly valued personal development, trying different things to find our passions, our hobbies, our friend groups, etc. He created such a safe space for me to explore my queerness, my deconstruction, and really stepping out on my own, but kind of with training wheels. He was a big, strong guy that commanded respect without ever having to demand it. And so I felt very empowered while in his orbit. As much as this was a happy, warm, fuzzy part of my life, I have to acknowledge that it did not help my codependent traits. When that marriage ended, he and I both had other partners. He had been gradually detaching from me and getting enmeshed with this other partner, and he had crossed boundaries that made things feel like he was cheating and not being fully ethical and honest about his intentions and feelings. I did not handle the breakup well. He informed me Christmas morning that he was leaving me and moved out about 3 days later. I spent a few days curled up in the fetal position, sobbing, not knowing how to go on without his support or presence in my life. I was angry, hurt, spiteful. It was not a good time for me. My poor girlfriend was really doing her best to be there for me, but the existence of her love did not fully replace the existence of his love for me. I felt the full force of how loving multiple people isn't about having a second person fill the gaps that the first person leaves. They are important and valuable and special on their own merits, independent of any other relationships that you have in life. I did the completely stereotypical lesbian thing, and we U-hauled. I moved her into my apartment that I had previously shared with my ex-husband days after he moved out, because I simply did not know how to live alone at that point. We had moved out to our own new place a few weeks later, but I continued to get more codependently enmeshed with my girlfriend. I was traumatized from the divorce and heavily trauma bonded with this new partner who was happy to be my emotional support human for a while. It seemed like we had the perfect relationship. We never fought. We may have had disagreements, but we never really argued or yelled. She was constantly showering me with compliments, encouragements, etc. My perfect hype woman. I had no idea that this was called love bombing. After a few years, we got married. It was finally legalized in our state. We probably would have done it sooner if it had been legal, but marriage equality took a while. We did this without any fanfare. We just went to the DMV, signed the paperwork, paid the fee, and we were married. I had wanted another wedding. Still fairly low-key, maybe just a reception, but I wanted something to celebrate the new commitment. My girlfriend, on the other hand, her wife at that point, was adamant that we did not have any sort of party or anything that was more than just like a immediate family dinner. She did not want to be the center of attention in a large group setting, and I was like, okay, this is just, her mental health dictates that certain things have to be avoided to ensure that she is safe and healthy and happy. So I made that concession. But it was about this time that the constant criticism entered. She destroyed my self-confidence, nitpicking every last thing I did, whether it was the way I cooked, the way I cleaned, the way I chewed my food, the way I walked, the types of shoes I wore, the friends that I hung out with, whether I did any social outings without her. There was just an immense amount of control and coercion that was going on, and it felt really bad really fast. And I was grieving that I had lost this, what I thought was amazing, perfect, happy connection that I had. I thought I had rebounded out of that bad marriage into something that was healthier, that was more authentic for who I was. And while being with a woman was more authentic, it wasn't healthy. It, just like with any relationship, it's not so much about the genders involved or the structure, whether you choose monogamy or polyamory. It's those individual people, because in any group, any group or any subset of humanity, you're going to find awful people and you're going to find wonderful people. I always felt like I needed to be apologizing for something. I never felt like I could trust my own instincts or decisions. I had to run everything by her. It had to be approved by her before we could do it, or before I could feel confident in doing XYZ. This just led to deeper and deeper codependency, and I became the sole breadwinner. She was disabled like me, but in her case, it was a much more functional limitation in the career fields that she had experience in, and she didn't see any way to branch out from there or seek a different type of employment or something. She chose to just sit at home and get bitter and refuse treatment. My world absolutely revolved around her. There was no thought of dating anybody else because there was no way I could take on any additional stress with how much she was putting on me. Things got very toxic very fast, and I couldn't tell anybody. She had isolated me from all of my friends because she was jealous of time that I spent with them, jealous of losing my attention 24/7. She didn't want to be the main character in a group event, but she absolutely had to be the main character in our relationship. And on top of not having friends to really discuss this with, she had really isolated me from my family as well. I had been in the process of trying to build a healthier relationship with them, but she tried to disrupt every effort I made to connect with them because she thought I should absolutely go no contact. I should not forgive them. I should be bitter about what they did to me for the whole rest of my life. That wasn't how I felt, and so I wasn't doing that, and it actually fairly upset her a good deal that I was not following her direction in how I should relate to my parents. But because my parents had always been very critical of LGBT relationships, and they had on multiple times told me that I should not be with her, not because of any specific negative thing that she did, but simply by virtue that she was a woman. And so, therefore, it was not a wholly heterosexual relationship. So I was scared to tell them that anything was wrong because I was like, it's just going to cement in their mind that all queer relationships are inherently flawed and inherently toxic and will never actually be a successful, healthy, happy relationship. I spent the next few years absolutely miserable and unsure of how to extricate myself from this situation. Since she had stopped working shortly into our relationship due to those medical issues, I had tried to be very accommodating because I went through a period in my previous marriage where my disorders were too debilitating for me to actually hold down a job for any significant period of time. So I understood the way that disability played into these things and how there needed to be compassion for those. And I thought, the point of having a life partner is to support you in these things and help you reach a place that is going to be best for you. But it became very apparent that she was not interested in finding treatment. She was not interested in gaining coping skills. She wanted a list of diagnoses that she could use to be a horrible, self-centered person and just have this entitlement that everyone around her needs to conform to what she wants and what is going to make her happy because, well, she has to deal with these disabilities. And so therefore everyone should make everything else in her life exactly how she wants it. I was terrified that she would be incredibly spiteful in a divorce. She had talked about previous partners and was very bitter and spiteful towards them, so I expected the same thing to happen to me if we were to break up. I remembered my first divorce and how awful that was, and honestly, my ex-husband was really civil throughout the whole process. He got a little bit salty in one of the court appearances that we had to make, and, said one thing that was snarky, but, on the whole, that is smooth sailing as far as a divorce goes. But even so, it was an incredibly awful experience. So I was like, I don't want to deal with a bunch of spite and anger and everything in the second divorce. So I was terrified to initiate a divorce or ask her to move out or something, because I just figured she would do whatever she could to take me to the cleaners, and whether that be just being emotionally traumatic or if that was going to be a financial issue. Then in 2019, she met someone that she initially was going to be just friends with, but then they really clicked on another level. And so she wanted to explore a romantic relationship with this person. And I have always had an easy time with compersion. It has never been difficult for me to be happy to see my partners engaging with other partners and finding happiness and fulfillment when it doesn't always include me. That's never been something I struggled with. So I was very happy that she found somebody, and I was like, hey, she's been so bitter and angry and everything in these last few years, maybe this will help perk her up. Maybe they'll get into some hobbies. It'll get her out of the house, just something to help with her mental health. The other person that she was dating was also in a bad relationship, or at least as she described it, she was in a bad relationship with her boyfriend. But my wife got entirely too into the drama between those two. Her girlfriend would actually send her voice memos of their arguments, so my wife could kind of help pick them apart and help her girlfriend come up with better arguments to make back at her boyfriend, which I feel like if you're going to someone for support with trying to say, how can I better communicate this idea with this person? That is a healthy thing. I think that violating someone's privacy and recording them without their knowledge or consent and then sharing that recording with another person is really unethical. It is highly problematic, and I was not okay with that. My wife tried to get me to listen to one of the recordings, and I was just like, this does not make me feel, I do not feel okay about this. I'm not going to participate in that. I'm not going to tell you what you can and can't do, but I am not going to take part in that. Eventually, my wife's girlfriend was desperate enough to get out of his house and out from under his control. And she really wanted to move up to our city from the next city over and get, her own apartment, job, all that good jazz. I have always been very quick to lend compassion to people who are in even a perceived or potential domestic violence situation. So I was immediately on board with, you can sleep on our couch for a couple of weeks, but just give you a place to land for a little bit until you can get out on your own. Now, my wife and I had multiple conversations about how this was going to impact things between the two of us after her girlfriend moved in. And she kept assuring me that nothing was going to change. It was going to be just like it was before she moved in. And I said, no, things are going to change. There's an inevitability. If you add another person to your living situation, your routines and your general practices and everything, your feelings about your home space are going to change. It's not guaranteed to change negatively, but it is going to change. And to be flippantly naive or ignorant or in denial that there's going to be change is a problem. So I tried to really hammer down some agreements as far as what our routines would look like. Previously, we had arranged that she would have a couple of sleepovers with her girlfriend. It's pretty frequent that she was over at her girlfriend's place. So then after her girlfriend moved in, I said, hey, let's work on trying to make this kind of a 50-50 split. So, I just ask that you spend 3 nights a week sleeping with me, and then you can sleep with her the rest of the time. Give her that extra day because she's the person who's going through this, leaving a bad situation. And so she would need extra emotional and physical support. So, I wanted to extend that to her. And my wife was like, oh yeah, absolutely, not a problem. I probably won't even sleep with her that much. I'll probably mostly be with you. I really want things to stay very much the same. I said, okay, well, we'll see how this goes. So we get her girlfriend moved in, and immediately my wife is coming to me and saying, hey, by the way, I'm not going to be with you tonight. I'm going to stay with her because of XYZ emotional issue. The next night, yeah, I'm not going to be with you. I'm going to be with her again because of XYZ emotional thing. And that happened every night for like the first week. So after that first week, I had another conversation with my wife just to reaffirm our agreements and say, you had said and you had committed to doing 3 nights a week with me, and that has not been the case. Now, I understand that this first week is extra upheaval, but I just want to reaffirm that going forward, that's what we're going to be aiming for. And she agreed. I'm so sorry. It has been extra emotional that I did not anticipate, and so it's really not going to be this long-term thing. It's just this first little week or whatever, and we'll get back to more of a regular routine that includes you in my life. So I thought, great, we'll see how it goes. Another week goes by, and she continues to make excuses as to why she needs to be sleeping in the living room on the couch, futon, with her girlfriend versus spending time with me. So we have another conversation. And I was like, okay, if we're not going to have as many nights sleeping together, then I need to have a weekly date night where you and I can go off on our own and we can spend time just the two of us. It doesn't have to be anything special. We can go for a drive. We can go to a park. We can take the dog out on a really long walk. But I just want us to dedicate time each week to reaffirming that connection that we have with each other while we're going through all of this upheaval and an additional person in our living space and everything. She said, absolutely, that sounds like a great plan. You might have guessed that did not get followed through on. And this continued to be a regular thing where we would periodically have discussions about how we were going to interact between her and I, how we were going to make space for our relationship in amongst everything else that was going on in our lives. And she would make commitments and then never follow through on them. I started getting very hurt, and it was very hard for me to hide that hurt from my wife's girlfriend. I really tried so hard not to take it out on her because I knew that this was not a meta issue. It was a hinge issue. My wife, who was the hinge between the two of us partners, was not being a good hinge and not honoring both relationships and not making time for both relationships in some capacity. So I made sure to try and focus my frustration and my disagreement with my wife rather than her girlfriend. It's hard to disentangle those things because, my wife and her girlfriend were both complicit in ensuring that the two of them were together every single night. And so, my meta wasn't completely blameless in all of this. At this point, I was telling my wife that, if she was no longer interested in a relationship with me, she needed to be honest about that. And, I had had issues with my ex-husband waiting until the very last second to tell me that he was having any serious concerns that would prompt him to leave until days before he was actually out of my house. So I wanted her to be more honest and upfront about how she felt and what she wanted. After months of this ordeal, the girlfriend finally found a place to live, had a job, and so she was going to move out. And once she gave me the move out date, the next day, my wife was like, hey, let's go for a drive. And I was like, awesome, I'd love to. Let's go out to one of our favorite spots. We'll drive out to the mountains. We'll park. We'll chat. We'll enjoy being in the woods. It'll be great. So we get out there, and immediately, as soon as we start talking, she tells me that she wants to move out with her girlfriend and that she wants to at least have a temporary separation where she nests with this other partner rather than with me, and that she wasn't sure if she was going to ever move back in with me, want to move back in with me, continue our marriage, etc. I was a bit surprised because, again, leading up to this, she had been completely verbally consistent that she wanted to stay together, that she wanted this marriage with me, that she wanted this polycule to work out, but her actions did something different. And so this time around, I was paying more attention to what her actions were saying than I had been with my ex-husband. So I wasn't as surprised, but I was still somewhat surprised that she was just like, let's go, I'm moving out, probably never coming back, bye-bye. We had actually started a paper divorce several months earlier for some legal purposes, and so we had already completed our separation agreement, had it signed, notarized, submitted to the court, all that good jazz. We had set up our separation to where I would not pay spousal support, but I would accept all of our community debt, and I would give her one of our cars, and I would even provide the insurance on the car for the first year while she got on her own 2 feet. The only thing we were waiting on at that point was the judge's final determination and decree of divorce. And after she had moved out with her girlfriend, within a couple of weeks, she flipped like a light switch. Now, one would think that after having 2 spouses leave you while seeing other people, that you would blame polyamory for these divorces and believe that having exclusivity in future relationships would keep you safer from this kind of heartbreak. However, I recognize that while they may have met their other partners while with me, that stayed with them through the divorce, because of polyamory, the issues in our marriages that actually led to the divorce had nothing to do with polyamory. Those issues had been present before these other partners came into our lives, and those additional relationships may have highlighted the problematic areas of our relationship. There was not an effort on both sides to work on these issues. The issues were largely related to untreated mental illness, bitterness from codependence, and some fundamental incompatibilities. I found out late into my first marriage that my ex-husband was incredibly anti-Semitic, as I was exploring Judaism as a prospective faith for myself. And he had always been very transphobic, which increasingly bothered me as I grew to understand more about the LGBT community, know people who are transgender, and to just have a better understanding of what it means to have a disconnect between your assigned gender at birth and how you identify and how you present yourself. I was very comfortable with people adopting very unconventional gender identity or gender presentation, and my ex-husband was completely disgusted by all of that. So that became a big issue, especially given that in the last couple of years I came out as non-binary. I have had people ask me earlier in adulthood, are you trans? Are you a guy? And I'm like, no, definitely not a guy. And so I had always assumed I was a cisgendered woman because I definitely wasn't a guy. And, those are your only two options. So what are you going to do? I wasn't super happy about being a girl or a woman, but it seemed like the lesser evil when presented with the option of being a man. But that's for another time. What I really had to work on, though, was the feeling of failure for having not just one, but two marriages end before death. It was deeply ingrained in me that consistency and longevity were the primary goalposts for having a successful relationship. I believed that I just had to keep working at it, even when the other person was not at all invested in working on our issues or on their own insecurities or their own personal issues. For many years, my mantra was divorce is not an option. I was able to see my short-term relationships as successful due to how they made me grow and learn and experience things, despite them not being lifelong relationships. But as soon as I attached the word marriage to it, it was an entirely different beast. I never went into either of these marriages thinking that I would ever give up on making it work. It was definitely going to be forever, come hell or high water. And as Alanis Morissette said, life has a funny way of sneaking up on you when you think everything's okay and everything's going right. My black and white idealized life plans and beliefs growing up did not match up to reality. Now, of course, my family insisted that this was all because I married someone without a strong testimony or a strong conviction in God the first time around, and that I married someone of the same gender the second time around. If I would just go back to church, date a good, godly man, get married in the church, it would all go tremendously differently. Even though data shows that you are just as likely to get divorced if you are a faith-based couple, and in some studies, you're actually more likely to experience domestic violence. In the last few years, I have drastically changed how I view dating and relationships. I switched from a generic polyamorous structure to a very clearly defined relationship anarchy structure. I wanted to remove the hierarchy from my relationships, and not just among my romantic relationships, but also with my friends and family. I had allowed a romantic connection to isolate me from friends and family, and I wasn't going to let that happen again. I was going to invest just as much time and energy and intention into my platonic and familial connections as I did with any romantic or sexual connections. I was going to be my own primary partner, honor my boundaries, and disconnect from the people that repeatedly disregard my boundaries and hurt me. Of course, after giving them the chance to correct behavior and not cross that boundary again. I was going to avoid nesting with a partner so I could maintain my own sacred space. I wanted to delay serious enmeshment to give myself time to adequately analyze my mental state and my why behind the what that I was doing. I did not want to become financially dependent on a partner. I did not want a partner to become financially dependent on me. I was just trying to be cognizant of the things that had gotten me into bad situations in the past within the things that I have control over. I also decided to commit to being single for an extended period of time. I had met my ex-husband when I was 20 years old and proceeded to spend the next 18 years consistently living with either a spouse or a long-term partner. I had never lived on my own before. I had a dorm room to myself for, I think, 2 months when I was in college. And that's the closest I had ever gotten to actually living on my own. I hadn't experienced going through the normal day-to-day activities without a partner to validate me, to support me, to encourage me. I needed to establish who I was, separate from any relationships that I have, what my needs are, what my insecurities are, how I can meet my own needs. I had also been dealing with instability in my mental health after a few months into the pandemic, so I really wanted to get a handle on that as well. I've now been single for a couple of years. I did date a woman for a little bit during that period of time, but we really didn't take off as a romantic partnership, just really close friends. And honestly, I am very happy that it turned out this way. This woman is an incredible supporter of mine. She is an amazing addition to my life, and there's absolutely no need to have a romantic connection there. She is just as special to me as she would be otherwise because of the friendship that we have. I have so much more clarity now about how I can act ethically in future relationships, how to regulate my emotions, how to communicate better than I used to, especially on emotionally charged topics, how to manage my time better, how to ensure I am taking time for myself while I am also making arrangements to spend time with friends, family, partners, and how to identify the things that make each of those connections special to me, and how I can reassure and validate those people in my lives for the things that make them special to me, the things that make them unique. I used to really value kitchen table polyamory, which is where your partners and their partners can all sit down around the kitchen table and have a family dinner or game night or something. You're all generally civil and friendly with one another without actually having a lot of interconnected romantic entanglements. However, I am now much more comfortable setting those as unique dynamics with each specific partner. I'm happy to go parallel, where I have very little to no interaction with my partner's other partners. Like, I know they exist, they know I exist, but we don't really interact. Kitchen table polyamory or garden party, which is a looser form of kitchen table polyamory, but not don't ask, don't tell. I have no interest in dating men. I tested that out with a guy that I thought I was into shortly after the divorce, but it turned out I really just wanted to be buddies with him, and I had trouble separating out those different types of attraction and affection because I had always just lumped all of it into romantic sexual connections. In these last couple years where I've been super single, I have found that I truly do not miss sex. I can absolutely take it or leave it. When I want it, it's meaningful and fun. But I have to set boundaries going forward with partners to not have any expectation of a regular and active sex life. As long as they aren't pushy about it, it'll happen periodically. But the more pressure that I feel to perform in that way, the more it's going to trigger my trauma response to be a people pleaser and to ignore my boundaries and just give them what they need in that moment, even if it is not honoring what I need or what could be hurtful to me. I now identify as being on the asexual spectrum after doing a lot of work to disentangle romantic versus sensual versus sexual attraction. I have found that I don't actually experience sexual attraction very often. I most often will experience romantic or sensual attraction to people, but because of how I grew up, I had always assumed that all three of those things were one and you couldn't have one without the other. So if you felt a romantic connection to someone, you must also feel sexually connected and vice versa. But that's just not how people work. We're a lot more nuanced than that. So early in adulthood, I assumed that if you wanted that romantic connection with someone, you had to put out. It frequently was not about my own desire and what I wanted, other than it was, I want this romantic connection with someone, so therefore I will do this sexual thing for them so they will give me the romantic validation that I want. And I recognize now that that is manipulative. Completely unintentionally manipulative. I was just doing what I thought I had to do to get my needs met. I was not well versed or practiced in communicating those needs directly and requesting to have specific needs met within certain boundaries or conditions. I just didn't know that you could do that, let alone how to do that. And that is something that I have gotten much better at as I got older. Imagine that. So sometimes I enjoyed sex greatly, and other times it was blah or even painful because I couldn't get my mind and or body into it. I did damage to myself in forcing myself to be sexual when I really didn't want to. And so I am very firm about where my consent lies and when I am willing to give that consent. I'm very glad that asexuality, as well as spontaneous versus responsive desire, is something that is talked about much more openly, because I think that those things could have been really helpful to me earlier in life had I been exposed to those conversations. And on that vein, with coming out as non-binary, I am also exceedingly grateful that there has been a greater public conversation about gender identity versus gender presentation versus biological sex versus, everything else that goes into gender. The stereotypical gender roles, the typical connotations of calling someone male or female, man or woman, boy or girl. I think that it's very valuable that we have more of those discussions, because not everyone is going to fit into that very narrow box that is currently accepted by the majority of society. Yes, people like me are pretty rare. It's rare to have bipolar. It is rare to be polyamorous. It is rare to be gay. It is rare to be non-binary. And it's certainly extremely rare to be a combination of all of those things. But that doesn't mean that I don't deserve to be understood, that I don't deserve to have social, I don't want to say validation because that's not really what it is, but social acceptance of who I say I am. You don't have to say, yes, it is good that you are XYZ, but I think it is important to respect my pronouns, to respect how I want to be referred to. Those are these conversations that we need to have, especially with people in their formative years, because it's really hard to unlearn this stuff as an adult, and we're expected to get into romantic long-term relationships fairly young in adulthood, and we bring all this baggage in, when if we could just have more open discussions in safe spaces that our parents create for us, that our teachers create for us, that we could have such a better understanding of ourselves and so much less insecurity, because we know solidly who we are, and it's okay that that is different from who somebody else is. And as much as I praise my ex-husband for helping me gain the confidence to explore who I am, I have done so much work on myself in these last few years while I have been single. It has really helped me to focus on validating myself, supporting myself, building healthy, non-romantic, non-sexual relationships that are less transactional than what my history with romantic and sexual relationships has been. In prior years, I could express examples of external validation that felt good to me, but I couldn't really identify things in my life that brought me stability that weren't dependent upon another person doing something for me. There have absolutely been times where I miss having a partner, but most of the time I stop and reflect on it and realize that I'm just wanting someone to validate a decision that I have made. And I'm really working hard on being able to validate myself in those moments and live by my own values rather than someone's expectation of me. Polyamory has been at the center of a lot of growth for me, not just by being in poly relationships, but by being in poly communities and having discussions with somewhat like-minded individuals who can have detailed conversations about ethics and best practices for various dynamics, and to appreciate the beauty and scope and breadth of the different dynamics that are out there that can be pursued. This year marks 21 years as identifying as polyamorous. And if I went back in time, I would certainly make some tweaks to some of the specific interactions that I had, or, specific choices that I made, especially very early on in my experience, just because looking back, hindsight is 20/20, and I can see where I could have done better. But I would not have changed that trajectory into non-monogamy. I do not think that monogamy is inherently bad. My parents have a wonderful, loving, supportive relationship that is built on that exclusivity, and it works for them, and I'm very happy for them. I just know that for me, I cannot shut down the opportunities to connect with others. I do not see a benefit for me for limiting who and how I can connect with others outside of maintaining ethical standards. And I have experienced amazing connections that contributed beauty to my life and others because of polyamory. I do think that polyamory forces you to confront more things than monogamy. There are a lot of things that can be easily ignored or completely unknown in a monogamous relationship because they don't show up until there is a perceived or actual infidelity, or you break up and they move on before you do. Those things are easily dismissed as being related to infidelity of some part. And so there is not a deeper introspection of, why did I feel that way in that situation? Was it because I was disrespected, or my boundaries were not honored? Or was it because I felt entitled to a relationship with that person, to a specific type of connection with that person, and they did not consent to reciprocating that with me? There's a lot to unpack there for the vast majority of people, if not all people. There's also a common pitfall, at least in American monogamy. I don't know if other countries are the same, but I know here, at least what I have experienced, there is an expectation of entitlement to your partner's time, labor, space, emotional labor. And in my belief, those things should be freely given in a relationship, as one is able to safely do so within their own boundaries. They should not be expected regardless of the situation. So while I have critiques of monogamy and some of its common practices, I also have critiques of non-monogamy that I am just as fiercely tied to. I am staunchly against triads unless they are organically formed. Unicorn hunting is 150% predatory in every single situation to one degree or another. I think that don't ask, don't tell is a recipe for disaster, and it cuts off communication and removes a lot of informed consent and leaves the gate wide open to a lot of infidelity and honest polyamorous people being a party to infidelity without realizing it. I can usually pick out sneakyarchy pretty well. That's where people hide their hierarchy, and they'll tell you up front, no, we don't have a hierarchy, don't have a hierarchy. But then as soon as you get attached and you get into the practice of polyamory with this set of people, you find out that really there are some pretty deeply ingrained hierarchical structures that they are not being honest and upfront about. And so again, that is an issue with informed consent. And so I have a big issue with that. I also have strong opinions about making sure that your polyamorous structure is clear in dating profiles and ensuring that you discuss that in greater detail with this potential partner before the first date. Again, for informed consent and removing the at least appearance of coercion, even if there isn't any actual coercion, making it seem like you're trying to get them invested before you drop the bomb that you're polyamorous, highly problematic. I am also firmly against trying to convert monogamous people into polyamory or allowing a partner to be polyamorous under duress. And that is where they are not consenting to a polyamorous relationship because they want to be polyamorous or because they are perfectly content with a polyamorous relationship. They are doing it as a ways to hang on to whatever semblance of a connection as they can with their existing partner while their partner goes off to be polyamorous with other people. They are doing it under duress, and that is coercion. That is not consent. Again, that's just an ethical standard for me. People are very often surprised to find out about my upbringing these days because I am so very different from who I was at 16, 18, even 25. Especially now after my concerted time of singleness and effort into personal growth these past few years, I am so confident in who I am and what I want from life and have deconstructed so much of my old beliefs. That doesn't mean that I've forgotten everything or that I don't still struggle with trauma or PTSD, but it's not the driving force in how I relate to the world. So I feel like I am, despite all of my stumbles and my mistakes and the conversations I wish I could have handled differently, I am so happy with the life that I have built for myself as a non-binary, queer, polyamorous, neurospicy person. I am so much more authentic in all of my interactions. And it's really hard for me to do anything that is anywhere close to going back into the closet for anything. Like, my ability to be in the closet at work is done. If I happen to be dating multiple people, I'm not going to be able to keep it straight as to which partner I allow myself to talk about at work. I'm not going to censor my social media to only show my primary partner. I refuse to relegate any partner to a secondary status. So they will always be present in my life as long as they are in my life. I can't go back. I can't not be non-binary. I can, with my family, I am okay with them using my old pronouns, but for anybody else, it's a whole different ballgame. I do expect my pronouns to be respected. And while I'm not super pushy about it, I will gently, lovingly let people know how I want to be referred to and request respectfully that they do so. In my deconstruction, I have spent an awful lot of time working on going from black and white thinking to accepting the world in the many shades of gray that it actually exists in. And doing things like questioning the structure of my relationships, questioning my sexuality, questioning my gender, questioning how I want to present myself to the world, questioning what I want out of the world. These things have been really important for my overall growth and development and have really helped me with my mental health. I will go into this in another video, but I struggled really, really hard with my mental health, especially while I was in the church and first deconstructing, because I had so many cultural ideas that were baked into my brain about what I was supposed to be, what I was supposed to do, what I was supposed to want. And I just couldn't make it all jive with how I actually felt inside. So it is incredibly freeing to finally be, even at the late age that I am, I'm not that old. But to finally be coming into my own and to feel so much security in who I am all by myself. And so I am grateful to all the people that I have interacted with in my polyamory journey that has helped to lead me here. I hope to be getting back to the church history and denominations over the next couple of days. I have been writing quite a bit. I just have been really trying to hammer down my timelines because unfortunately some of my sources were not quite matching up. So once I make sure everything is editorially okay, we'll get back onto that track. But thank you for taking a sidestep into me for a while. I want to encourage everybody to go check out Jesus Is My Girlfriend. They have some phenomenal videos about deconstruction and being a queer kid in a cult, and they're just wonderful. So I highly recommend them, as well as their sibling, Ex Fundy Diaries. And I will see you next time.